Okay, so hopefully you can all hear me. I recognise a few faces tonight, which means you're some of my spotters, as I call people who contribute to the annual reports, which you may have seen have just been released for Rice County 66 and 67. As you just heard, I'll do a little bit more of an intro though. So I'm Michael Coates. By day, I'm a management consultant, and I was going to say by night, I go looking for dragonflies. That's not strictly true. In whatever time I can find, I try to get out there, and if we haven't actually met, you may have come across me. I'm that guy that you see in the middle of nowhere, staring intently at probably a very basic looking pond, and that really is what dragonfly spotting predominantly involves: staring at ponds and the vegetation around those ponds. And once you get your eye in, you will see dragonfly. When you first start, you can be standing there looking at exactly the same pond as me, and you see nothing. But I promise you, it's one of these things where if you just keep doing it, you will start to spot the shadow of one flying over your head. You will be able to hear them. And once you start looking for the exuvia, and I'll be talking more about that in a minute, the trick is to look at vegetation vertically. You go up and down, not left to right. The reason for that is your brain will be going green, 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 brown, and you instinctively stop. Whereas if you go left to right or right to left, it goes green, gap, green, gap, green, gap. So it's constantly doing it. But if you go up and down, you will start to see that there is something on that vegetation. It may or may not be anything to do with dragonfly, but it's worth stopping and having a look. So you will get your eye in. For those of you who don't really know a lot about dragonfly, there is another immense advantage to becoming an enthusiast. And that is, it's a very quick learning curve. I do not have a lot of patience. Okay, so for instance, I've always wanted to learn the guitar. But if I couldn't play Stairway to Heaven within maybe 30 minutes of starting, what's the point? So I've never even had one single guitar lesson. So my ability to persevere and learn lots is quite limited. And in 2015, which is not that long ago, I went to a talk, not dissimilar to this, about dragonflies. I didn't know one end of a dragonfly from another. I wasn't even sure if I'd really ever seen one. And within 4 years, I was county recorder. Why? Because in the northeast of England, there's only 20 species to learn. How good is that? And once you've worked out if it's a dragonfly or a damselfly, you're down to a 1 in 10 chance of getting it right. And if you can work out what colour it is, you're down to a 1 in 4 chance of knowing what it is. So you can learn about dragonflies pretty swiftly. So although I normally do a talk on how to identify them, we've just come to the end of the year, so I thought it would be a good opportunity to say a little bit more about some of the ups and downs, some of the things that have really have been newsworthy or things that have improved, but also things that didn't go quite so well for dragonfly last year. So just to make sure we are talking from a level playing field here, this is what we're talking about. Dragonfly on the left, damselfly on the right. I've tried to show them to give you a relative size, because that's one of the easiest ways of telling the difference between a dragonfly and a damselfly. It's just the sheer bulk of what you are looking at. But if you really want to know, you're still not quite sure, there are a few other characteristics. The first being the eyes. And the eyes take up the vast bulk of the head. And on a dragonfly, the eyes meet in the middle on the top of the head. On a damselfly, they look like a pair of those beat headphones, or Princess Leia's hair, depending on how old you are in the room. Okay, so they're on the side. Eyes on the side, damselfly. Eyes up and over and meeting in the middle, dragonfly. The other big difference you can see on here. The damselfly can fold its wings back. And once a dragonfly has emerged, it can no longer do that. So if its wings are out, well, it could be either, but if its wings are back, it's a damselfly. Full stop. So there you go. You now know how to tell the difference. You've now reduced in the northeast of England down to a 1 in 10 chance of getting your identification right. Now, although they look massive on this screen, a damselfly is probably, 3 or 4 centimetres long, and dragonfly could be, 6 to 10 centimetres long. They're not that big, but they're big enough for you to want to get out the way if it's coming towards your head. But had you have been in Newcastle 300 million years ago, you would have definitely ducked, because then their wingspan was over 1 metre. So they were quite substantial creatures in those days. As I'm sure you know, a lot of that is to do with the amount of oxygen that was in the atmosphere at those times. But we know from fossil records that apart from that big difference in size, essentially they have really changed very little in terms of their physiology. Now, I do a lot of training of managers, that's my business, and I teach people how to do presentations. One of the things I tell them is never talk about religion or politics, okay? I'm going to break that rule now. If you believe in intelligent design, then I can tell you now that the intelligent designer was not American. Why? Not for the reason you're possibly thinking, but because they used the decimal system. Okay, the designer of Dragonfly was into the decimal system, which is really useful for us because it means that their body is divided into 10 segments, which we call S1 to S10. And this is very handy because when you see some markings on the body and you get your guidebook, and I can show you the best ones at the end, it will tell you what to look for on S1 or S3 or S8, and then you can actually work that out because S1 is always just behind the thorax and S10 is right at the end next to the anal appendages, which we'll be talking more about because you have to have a talk about anal appendages if you're into Dragonfly. And so there's these 10 perfect segments with different colorations. It is worth learning some of the basic names of the body parts. The reason being is any guidebook, once it's got beyond telling you about S1, S2, etc., will start talking about antihumeral stripes and the sigma and costa and what to look, and then if you don't know what those words mean, you wouldn't know which part of the body to look at. So it is worth just learning a few of the main terms for the body parts, just so that the guidebooks are a little bit more handy to you. Now, as was mentioned, I've been recorder for Vice County 66, so essentially County Durham, Tees to Tyne, for a few years now. Recently taken on 67. I didn't look at a map before I said I would do it. So, it now goes from the Tees all the way up to Amble to Kielder and down. It's a big area. So please, any help you can give in submitting sightings will be very much appreciated, because I am not going to be able to, even in my spare time, get over that massive area. So what I've done is I've combined the sightings last year for both 66 and 67 to give you a feel for the northeast, what was commonly seen, and therefore what you're more likely to see this year. And you'll notice that by a long way, the common data dragonfly is by far the most common in the northeast, with over double the next one, which was the blue-tailed damselfly. Now, for those of you who do know, a little bit, you've probably seen the quintessential British blue-coloured damselfly whenever you go on a walk. That is generally this one, a common blue damselfly. There is a slight problem though. It is virtually identical to this one, the azure. If you're close enough, or you get a good photo, the difference is relatively easy to work out. But if you're looking at a pond and there's 100 little blue things flying around, I think most people submit the sightings and say that they saw 100 common blue damselfly. It was probably a mixture of both. So I would suspect that azures are under-reported. I mentioned that there's 20 species, and if you've really got OCD and done your counting, you will have seen, well, one did, you will see there's 22 on the screen, okay? Well, that's because these ones here are not, well, I don't think they're breeding here. I suspect that the southern migrant hawker just blew in. We had one at RSPB Saltholm a few years ago, and it was like Meghan and Harry had just arrived. I mean, the paparazzi were there, people were fighting, people were screaming down phones, get here, get here. I mean, it's a dragonfly. I mean, I'm keen, but I'm not that keen. And so I think what happens is occasionally they just get blown in. This one here, as I'll come on to in a few minutes, is a little more tricky, but certainly the 20 above that are successfully breeding in this area. Now, I'm sure most of you know that they mate in like a heart-shaped wheel, and then the female lays eggs two different ways, either by injecting them into vegetation, rotting wood, or into mud, or onto water, and it drops down to the bottom. And it then, once it hatches, becomes, and this is a term of much debate, it either becomes a larvae or a nymph, depending on which school of thought you like to go on. I'm going to be calling them larvae. And they look slightly different, damselfly and dragonfly, so if you see one in the water, you would be able to still tell the difference even at this early stage. And then anything between about 9 months and 3 years, they emerge. And they do that by crawling up vegetation, grabbing hold of it. Remember, they are an underwater species at this point. They've now crawled out of the water, they've grabbed hold of some vegetation, and then, like in the Alien movie, but instead of bursting out the stomach, they come out the back of the neck and come out like this. You were mentioning Vivian Kent earlier. This photograph was taken by Vivian Kent. Come down like here, and then they do the mother of all sit-ups, grab hold with their new legs onto the same vegetation, and then they wiggle their back legs out, and then they have emerged. Now, at this point, they are very vulnerable to predation and falling into the water. And as my wife, who's here tonight, will know, I spend much of my life saving them, because wherever I go in the world, and I do travel quite a lot and look for a dragonfly, I always find them drowning and therefore have to save them. This is not how you should hold a dragonfly, by the way, but I had no choice on this occasion. It was that or it drowning. But they are very vulnerable because at this point they can't fly. So here we go, here's the same one, and you'll notice that the wings are wet and glossy. This means it's a tenorol, it means it's just emerged, probably within, well, I know that that was within the last few minutes, but it could be within the last few hours. And what's happening now is that the blood is now circulating around the wings, and only once that blood has properly circulated will it be able to fly. During that time, very vulnerable. Now, as I mentioned, they leave exuvia. The exoskeleton that it had when it was larvae, it's left it on the vegetation that it just emerged from. And when you are submitting sightings, while we definitely want sightings of ones you have seen flying, strictly speaking, the most significant recording is whether you found exuvia. And the reason is this. If aliens were surveying us right now, they would see you lot all in this lecture room. Therefore, it would be a reasonable conclusion to come to that you like living in lecture halls and that you bred here with each other, okay? And unless you're going to tell me something, Gordon, that I didn't know about this group, I think that's unlikely to be the case. But it would be a natural conclusion because you're all here. So the same applies when you see dragonflies at a pond. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are breeding successfully at that pond. The exuvia is the evidence that we need. So please do look out for those with that up-down motion that I mentioned. There is another really good thing though. Because they tend, when they've emerged, to stay relatively close to the exuvia for a couple of hours, it really helps to be able to identify what species that exuvia is, because the previous owner is not very far away. And in this instance, this is a damselfly. Well done. Which one? A large red damselfly. So, let me tell you a little bit about the large red. The large red is always the first to emerge, particularly in the northeast of England. Another interesting fact is that the females have 3 different colorations. They still have some red on them though, just far less than the males do. And the reason I'm pointing that out is there is only one damselfly in the northeast of England that has red on it. So if you see a damselfly in the northeast of England with red on it, it's a large red damselfly. You have now learned how to identify one of the 20. It's relatively easy when you know those 2 things. Colour, is it dragonfly, is it damselfly? Now, why are the large reds typically the first? Well, underwater, what's going on is that over a period of time they molt. They do that in order to get bigger. And there's between, I think it's 10 and 14 of these instars, these moltings, before they finally emerge. And what the large red does is it gets to that penultimate stage in the autumn, whereas the other species get there in the spring. Basically, they jump the gun. And what that means is, from an evolutionary point of view, is it's very handy for them. They're the first out, so they get the pickings of any insects to eat. The dragonflies haven't emerged, so they've got one less predator to worry about. But basically, as I say, they're doing it by just getting to that penultimate stage of development under the water in late autumn rather than early spring. So my prediction for 2025 is that the first large red in VC66 will be seen on the 25th of April, and above the north of the Tyne, I reckon the 30th of April. So if you make a note of those dates, you can come back to me, and I'm willing to put a small amount of money on those dates. My rationale is this: they are very consistent as a species, but we haven't had a brutally cold winter. So as long as we don't have a really sustained cold spell, then I think they will be a few days earlier than last year, and hence my prediction of those dates. And that means the season starts and goes on most years till November, sometimes even into December. Now, I'm often asked, how long do they live? And the answer to that is anything from a few seconds, because they fall into the water having emerged and drown or get eaten, to a few weeks. The most common way that they die is this: they are predated. And birds are a common enemy for them, but so are other dragonflies and damselflies. So what you are looking at here, this was from Rainton Meadows, is a large red damselfly, a male, in tandem with the female, so that it was mating probably a few seconds earlier, and he is having his head bitten off. But you've got to give him his due. He's carried on holding on to the female, even though he's literally lost his head. Okay, that's dedication for you. And I didn't play the sound, but you can actually hear the crunching. So I put this on YouTube, and if you read the annual report, you can see where the link is, and you can listen to the sound of a four-spotted chaser, that's what this is, eating a large red damselfly in the middle of it mating. But other things that predate them would be, here you've got your weaver even, spider. So spider webs you will very commonly see, particularly damselflies, stuck in there, and then they become a meal. But as I say, birds, it's a staple thing, particularly for the flycatcher type birds. Now, the other way that they drown, particularly the females, is when they are mating. They like to lay their eggs into vegetation underneath the water, and so they do that by being on some vegetation, and then S10, if you remember, that's the anal end, goes down under the water and injects into vegetation that is there. But that means they sometimes fall in or simply get caught in the weed. So what you have here is the male trying to lift the female out, and she, though, is still diligently, you can tell by the shape here, still diligently laying eggs. But he is trying to move her to somewhere else. He wants his DNA to be spread as widely as possible, but he simply can't lift her up. But you see how he flies off and how quickly he reattaches. Split second, that's all he needs, and he can grab her by the back of the neck with the appendages at the end of his abdomen. So he tries and continues to try to move her on. She simply carries on laying eggs. Now, this is a different one, same pond. Even then, weed can be a problem. And what we can see here is that she is still attached. Why is this happening? Well, dragonfly and damselfly front legs have stiff hairs all the way up. This is used in part for catching other insects, which they then lift up like a JCB into their mouth. Obviously, if it's designed to catch things, it can easily catch onto vegetation as well, which proves to be their downfall. Now here we have a female that is now under water, but the wings are still sticking out, and this has attracted all these males. They want to get her out, and that's normally how the female is saved, by another male. On this occasion though, this guy tried to be helpful, but basically pushed her under. All the other males, they know she's there, so they're trying to think of different ways to get her out. Now, I waited with the camera rolling because female dragonfly can spend quite a long time underwater and survive, for reasons I'll explain in a second. Not on this occasion. Okay. Now, how do they survive underwater? Well, it's these little hairs that you see on these photos here. This captures little tiny bubbles of air, so when they are underwater laying eggs and eventually the male lets go, they're able to float up and hopefully clamber onto some vegetation, or, as I mentioned, much more commonly, they float up and are grabbed instantly by another male, not being heroic and gentlemanly, but saving the female, grab her, fly her out of the water. And it's the air in between the hairs which is allowing that to happen. Here's yet another one saved. This was also Rainton Meadows. This is the common darter. The reason I'm showing you about the common darter, I told you earlier, it's the most common species that you're going to see in this region, very widespread. The males are a reddy brown colour. This is a female. But both sexes, if you look at the top of the eyes, it matches the colour of the top of the thorax. Just a piece of trivia there for you. The male is this reddy brown. So, if you do see one, and you take a photograph or you get close, check the legs. What we're looking at here is like a white military stripe down the side of their legs. And the reason that is very useful to spot is they can be mistaken for another species called the ruddy darter. The ruddy darter is a much more vibrant red. It has a nipped waist on the male as well. But if you look, the legs are solid black. So you can now tell the difference between two reddish dragonfly species in the northeast of England. Got a stripe down the sides of its legs, common darter. Black legs, ruddy darter. Now, they also, apart from being very common, are nearly always the last species to be seen. Last year it was the 30th of October, but the year before it was the 9th, I think, of December. So, but it's always a common darter in this region that's the last to be seen. Two reasons. The first is just sheer numbers. Because there's so many more of them, including ones migrating from the south and the continent, there is simply more likelihood of them being the last. But the other reason is that they can actually cope with temperatures under 12 degrees, which most dragonfly species cannot. And this is one of the ways that they do that coping. You've probably seen this from late autumn onwards, they love to sit on fence posts or on asphalt floors. They're absorbing the temperature. And one of the real advantages for photographers amongst you is when they do this, you can get right up to them. And I'm talking within a centimetre with your phone and take photographs. They, particularly late autumn, love to just sit there, soak up the sun. Now, common darters, and probably all dragonfly, but the study was done on common darters, are extremely manoeuvrable. So, in this study here in 2021, by attaching magnets to them, as you do, okay, and then monitoring their movements, they were able to see that they could correct themselves in a fall by doing an upside down flip. Now that is quite amazing. What's even more amazing though is somehow the researchers were able to work this out, that they do this when they're unconscious. How on earth do you get a group of unconscious dragonfly with magnets attached to them and then work out what they're doing? But essentially what they're saying here is they don't even do this instinctively. Their bodies are clearly designed to be able to right themselves when they are free falling. Now, another species that I just want to quickly highlight is this one here, the black-tailed skimmer. The reason being, in VC 66 we saw loads of them. North of the Tyne, very few were recorded. I'm sure they're here. The reason that I suspect they weren't recorded is they are very difficult to spot. Because what they like to do, if they are male, they like to rest on asphalt or grey grit paths. And the females, which are a yellowy, greeny, brown colour, love to rest on yellowy, greeny, bare patches of ground. So they clearly select areas to rest on that match their coloration. So again, you really have to be walking, looking downwards in order to see them. It's also possible that they're being confused for a more common species, the broad-bodied chaser. But I've highlighted here that the broad-bodied chaser is quite, well, fat, thick. If we go back, this is very slim. It's like a stealth fighter, okay? But also you see this black, hence black-tailed skimmer. It's not there on the broad-bodied chasers. So in this region, the most common but difficult to spot one is this species here. Now there were two big stories that I'm going to finish off on tonight about what happened in 2024, and the first was to do with this species, the small red-eyed damselfly. For some years they have been breeding at Brasside Pond next to Franklin Jail outside Durham. And my poor wife has had to come with me because I have to carry so much camera equipment each year on the 25th of July to go and photograph them, because they're always there on the 25th of July. Why so much equipment? Because it's a massive pond and they are about this long and they're probably 30 or 40 metres out in the middle. I have a camera with a 3000mm lens and I can just get shots to identify them. So we went again, 25th of July, to do that, only to then find every man and their dog was seeing them across the region. In one season, they spread essentially from Brasside. They were being seen at a couple of other places intermittently. Essentially, they spread out from there to 17 other sites, including Gosforth, which you were hearing about a few minutes ago. But at Rainton Meadows, they had just dug a new pond right next to the path at the rear of the reserve, It was so new, there was only a little bit of vegetation just floating in it, and that's what they love, floating vegetation, and you could go and see them there, and you could just photograph them with your phone. So all those years of me going with all the equipment and telescopes, people were now sending me photographs that they'd taken on their phones. So, why is it called the small red eye? Well, if you haven't noticed, and also in the northeast, it is the only species with a red eye. You can't get that one wrong around here. So you now know how to identify another one. It's mainly blue and black, red eyes, small red-eyed damselfly. The most intriguing record that I got, though, when I took on VC67 was this one, the variable damselfly. I've only ever seen one, I think, once in the south of England, so my instinct was to reject the sighting, because people often put ones that they've just read about in a book, or Google told them it was this species. So I was just about to reject it when I realised that I don't know if is David here tonight, I don't know David, but no, had put a great photograph. And yeah, sure enough it is. And then when I tracked back, I found that there was always 2 or 3 spotted north of the Tyne for the last few years. I don't know if they're just being blown in or if they're breeding here. And the reason why I say it like that is we never see them in VC66. So how are they north of the Tyne? If they were blowing in, surely they would blow in somewhere south of the Tyne as well. So a bit of a mystery, so please look out for those this year and definitely get photographs. But the most newsworthy one was the willow emerald damselflies. Now there's been a national study of these over the last 10 years. They've been moving steadily up the eastern coast, and we've been waiting for them to arrive in VC66 for some years, and we were delighted when we found that they were successfully breeding at Joe's Pond at Rainton Meadows. We've been tracking them for the last 3 years, and this year I took a group down there. Some of you were with me, and I think saw 6 or 7 on that day. But I think even more impressive was the fact that Ian and Elaine Burnell, who you might know at Gosforth, photographed them there last year, laying their eggs into the branches of the willow, which is why they're called willow emerald damselflies. And even more importantly, this is what you look out for when the egg bursts out of the willow and it heals. It creates this distinctive scar. And they have been checking the vegetation where these eggs were laid, and with the eye of faith you can see the same scarring was seen on the 30th of January this year. What we're a little unsure though is whether that's actually from last year and it just hadn't been spotted before, or whether that's this year's. But we're hoping it's this year's, in which case they are successfully breeding, meaning that Gosforth is the most northerly site in the UK for this species. Now, if you have your phones with you, I'll leave some of these up on the screen later, but if you want to know the best sites to go to in VC66, I haven't done this for 67 yet, I've created a Google map which has all of the best locations on, gives you a bit of information about what species you might see there, where to park, etc. And if you want to record your sightings, if you're south of the Tyne, there are 3 ways you can do that. I've created an app for those key sites, and you can access that via this QR code. Again, I'll distribute these and show these again later if you don't get time to grab it. or you can do it on iNaturalist, or you can use iRecord. So they're the three sources of information that I use for the annual report: iNaturalist, iRecord, and my own app. If you want to download the annual report, it's a gripping read, as I said. Lots of information, lots of probably your photographs in there. Again, you can download it from here. It's on the Durham Wildlife Trust's website. The bottom of the page that will take you to, you can download 2024, 23, 22, 21, etc., all the previous year's reports. BC67, I'll try and distribute via your website here. I haven't found a home for that as yet. So just to finish off, I would encourage you to always be on the lookout for dragonflies. As I say, once you've got your eye in, you will see them everywhere. So for some of you who know me, I spend a lot of time out in Mexico. Here you go. Even by the pool, I see dragonfly. So please always be on the lookout for them, and please do submit your sightings. On that note, I will open up for some questions.